For my environmental place narrative project, I chose Northerly Island, a park in Chicago. The motto of Chicago is Urbs in Ordo, which in Latin means city in a garden. Daniel Burnham described Chicago, on becoming a city, chose for its motto Urbs in Ordo, a city set in a garden. Such indeed it then was, with the opalescent waters of the lake at its front, and on its three sides the boundless prairie carpeted with waving grass bedecked with brilliant wildflowers. The idea of a city in a garden is the idea that even in an urban environment, you are still with and in the environment around you. The motto of the Chicago Park District is Hortus in Urbe, which means garden in a city, and a greater reflection of the importance and value of parks in the city of Chicago. Another way that the idea of sitting in a garden is so valued in Chicago is the lakefront rule, which is a policy that has been around for over a century that limits the amount of development that it can occur on the lakefront as a means to preserve the lakefront environment. Overall, parks are and always have been a crucial part of city life in Chicago. Northerly Island is a Chicago park along the lakefront on Burnham Harbor. If we look at this picture, we see how close it is to so many different Chicago landmarks. It is just across the harbor from Soldier Field, and it's in the museum campus, which includes the Field Museum, Shedd Aquarium, and the Adler Planetarium. Despite its location, the park is actually a bit of a hidden gem in the city. This park, though, is the perfect encapsulation of the idea of city in a garden. Northerly Island was originally a man-made island, and the idea of this came from Daniel Burnham's 1909 Plan of Chicago. The 1909 Plan of Chicago was a proposal for the city written by Daniel Burnham, an architect who was the director of works for the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. The plan was about how to improve the city, from the addition of parks to improved transportation methods. A quote that shows Daniel Burnham's commitment to parks goes as follows. Chicago, on becoming a city, chose for its motto Urbs in Ordo, a city set in a garden. Such indeed then it was, with the opalescent waters of the lake at its front, and on its three sides the boundless prairie, carpeted with waving grass bedecked with brilliant wildflowers. The quick advance of commerce and manufacturing, the rapid buildings of railroads and factories, and the hastily constructed homes of operatives crowded out nature's prairie's flowers. Still the motto lingered in the minds of men, and in 1839 they struggled to secure for fast-growing population park spaces, which should at least recall the gardens that of necessity had been sacrificed. In the year mentioned, a half square of Michigan Avenue, where the public library now stands, comprised the entire park system of the city of Chicago. 3 years later, Washington Square was added, then followed in intervals Jefferson, Union, Ellis, and Bruning Park, each representing the public spirit of individuals rather than the foresight of the city. In 1864, the Common Council, having been awakened to the necessity of providing recreation places for the growing multitudes of citizens, secured a portion of the lands which later came to be named Lincoln Park, and the sum of $10,000 was appropriated for park improvement. At first, no effort was made to provide connections among the various parks, but in 1869 a movement was started by those whom the practical people of the day called dreamers, to realize the then half-forgotten and wholly disregarded model by framing the city of Chicago with a garden of parks and boulevards, beginning at Lincoln Park on the north and connecting to Humboldt, Garfield, Douglas, Washington, and Jackson parks. The attempt succeeded. The Chicago Park District came to take second place among the park areas of the United States and was the pride and glory of the city. Park construction was slow at first, but due to its location in the Chicago World's Fair of 1933, a century of progress, construction sped up. Due to the needs of the World's Fair, Northerly Island was expanded a little bit to fit more exhibits. Through this World's Fair, bridges were constructed to connect Northerly Island to the rest of Chicago. A few years later, a WPA project replaced the bridges with causeways, forever connecting Northerly Island to Chicago. Following the World's Fair, Northerly Island did not stay a park. The 1909 plan of Chicago did not mention air travel. The first time an airplane flew in Chicago was in 1910. In the following year, there was an International Aeronautics Exposition. The idea of an airport in Chicago was becoming more and more popular. Around 1916, Edward H. Bennett, a co-author of the Plan of Chicago, said the lakefront would be one of the best spots for an airport. Northerly Island's land was then zoned to be an airport and was eventually turned into Merrill C. Meigs Field Airport in 1948. This construction expanded Northerly Island again, of course at the same time removing any possibility of this being a recreation area for the city. Meigs Field was a small airport which became well known due to its location in the middle of the city. Additionally, Meigs Field now is fairly well known because of its inclusion in Microsoft's Flight Simulator game. By the 1990s, Meigs Field only had one airline flying out, and their only regular flights were to and from Springfield, Illinois. The lease of the land from the Park District to Meigs Field was scheduled to expire in 1996. Mayor Richard Daley wanted to evict Meigs Field once the lease expired and convert Northerly Island into a park. Meigs Field was mainly serving businessmen and Springfield politicians by this point, so most Chicagoans approved of this idea. Others argued that closing Meigs Field would lose the city money, deter businessmen from wanting to do business in the city, or that Meigs Field was a landmark of the city. In the 1990s, Chicagoans had a lot of opinions about the idea of turning Meigs Field into a park. Here are just some examples of opinions that were submitted to editorial pieces in the Chicago Sun-Times at the time. Some of the main points towards keeping Meigs Field open were that Meigs Field was a landmark of the city and that it attracted business people to do business in the city, as well as a lot of pilots and aircraft owners believed that Meigs Field was a necessary location for air travel. Others pointed to the environmental damage that Meigs Field caused to the lake, as well as the lakefront rule as a reason to remove Meigs Field and convert it into a park. Others pointed to the idea that Meigs Field only serves Springfield politicians and is not useful. As Daley pushed for this idea to turn Meigs Field into a park, Illinois Governor Jim Edgar opposed this idea. He argued that it would be an economic loss for the city. The battle between the mayor and the governor over the state of Meigs Field started in 1994 and ended in 1997. Compromise was met through a deal that allowed for Meigs Field to stay open for another 5 years, and then after that point, Meigs Field would close, and Jim Edgar could not interfere with Daley's park plan. This deal was then extended as a compromise related to a deal about O'Hare Airport with the following governor, Governor Homer Ryan. However, in the years following 9/11, the idea of keeping an airport open that was so close to downtown area became a security risk. Many more battles opened between the mayor's office and the governor's office, which resulted in around 11 p.m. on March 30th, 2003, Mayor Daley sent bulldozers to tear up Meigs Field, permanently closing it. So, here's just a few images of the demolition of Meigs Field on March 30th to 31st, 2003. We see that X's were drawn along the runway and bulldozers were sent to tear them up. Critics note that this move was wrong and that Daley had no right to do this. However, it should be noted that the lease had expired and this was Park District land. Additionally, there was a no-fly zone called over a week earlier, closing Meigs Field at this point. So today, Northerly Island is a park. The development to turn Northerly Island into a park started in 2005. Now Northerly Island is a public park with a strong commitment to nature preservation. Here, pictured here is one of many prairies with a beautiful sculptured garden. Now looking close here are some more pictures of Northerly Island today, where we see that there is a beautiful lagoon that embraces a lot of the natural flora, as well as a large commitment from the park district to keep the nature development in progress. Additionally, if you look at the bottom left, they do prescribed burns on the area in order to preserve the natural ecology. And they also include a lot of programs that help educate the public about this movement. There's also a lot of natural wildflowers, as well as if you look in the middle picture on the right, you see that this is a prairie, which is also acts as an area where they do a lot of outreach for children in the area. Meigsfield no longer exists, but the traces of Meigsfield are still present today in Northerly Island. If we look here at the terminal building, this is the actual park district official building of this Northerly Island. This used to be the airport terminal of Meigs Field, and they've maintained it and converted it into a park building. You then look below, the control tower is still there, however it's not in use as the building is currently condemned. If we look here at these rocks though, there's a beach that is along Northerly Island called 12th Street Beach. If you look close at these rocks, they are not naturally occurring. They appear to be rubble, and they are very likely, when you look close, a torn up runway that have been now converted into rocks that line this beach area. It's very similar to Kennecott, where we saw the traces of the railroads today. Quarter Center Bay, Garden in the City. Northerly Island today is the park that Daniel Burnham always wanted it to be. There's a park in the middle of the city that embraces the lakefront, filled with prairies. Northerly Island is a space for people to live with the environment. The park is booked with community events that allow people to interact with nature and their community, engages with social systems to allow people to become more familiar with the nature that lives around them, as well as their own community members. I think this photo perfectly encapsulates the state of Northerly Island today, where we see this state of sprawling nature of a lagoon covered in natural and native wildflowers that is in the skyline of the beautiful urban area is still so present. And at the same time, we still see remnants of Meigs Field as the park is still trying to convert back to the beautiful man-made island that Daniel Burnham always wanted it to be.